The Galactic Council convened in the Grand Hall. The hum of activity filled the air as representatives from species across the galaxy took their seats. The space was vast, towering columns of metal and glass stretched up to the ceiling above, with holographic displays shimmering in the air to display statistics, trade proposals, and the balance of power. The room was alive with the murmurs of thousands of voices, each delegate eager to make their case for the future of the galaxy, while their species representatives kept a careful eye on every move made. At the center of it all were the humans, the newest members of the council. Their presence met with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion as they sat quietly at the table, their seats placed at the far end beside a large window that overlooked the stars outside. Their representatives were few compared to the other species, with only a handful of humans present. As they waited for the negotiations to begin, their eyes scanning the room, their expressions unreadable. The other species watched them, but did not approach. Their stance was one of careful observation, silent and still, almost as if they were waiting for something. The other delegates could not help but feel the presence of the humans. It was not the kind of presence that could be easily ignored or dismissed. It was something unspoken, an awareness that hung in the air. The humans had been thrust into the council with little fanfare, and yet now that they were here, it was impossible to disregard their existence. Some species regarded them with open curiosity, wondering what kind of civilization could rise from such a young and seemingly fragile species. Others regarded them with quiet wariness, unsure of what to make of this new force among the stars. As the debates began, the council erupted into heated discussions. The older species, with their long histories and advanced technologies, argued over trade routes and resource distribution. Their voices rose in volume as they made their demands, each delegate eager to secure their place in the future of the galaxy. Alliances were formed and broken in the blink of an eye. The room was a whirlwind of politics and posturing, the very air thick with tension. The humans remained silent, not participating, not offering opinions, but their eyes never left the debate. The longer the discussions dragged on, the more evident it became that the humans were different. Their silence was not the silence of submission, nor was it the silence of a species overwhelmed by the weight of galactic politics. No, it was something else. Their stillness was purposeful, calculated, as though they were not concerned with what was being said around them at all. The council had been at this for hours, and the humans had yet to utter a word. Their demeanor was calm, their presence calm yet undeniably powerful, a quiet force that seemed to reverberate through the chamber without a single action taken. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of arguing, one of the council members, an elder from the Xertil species, turned to the humans with an almost condescending expression, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of their lips. "Well, humans, it seems you have no stake in these matters. Perhaps you would like to express your thoughts." The words hung in the air, and for the first time the humans shifted their gaze slightly toward the elder. But they did not speak. They only rose slowly from their seats, their movements deliberate, no words, no gestures, just a slow and steady rise. With every eye in the room upon them, the humans began to walk toward the exit, leaving the council chamber without a single word spoken. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The discussions faltered, the air became thick with confusion. As the humans walked out the doors, their backs turned to the galaxy's most powerful leaders. The silence that followed their departure was suffocating, as if the very air in the council chamber had thickened. Delegates exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do next. The human representatives had risen from their seats without warning, walking calmly and deliberately toward the exit. No one had seen it coming. There was no outburst, no loud protest, just an eerie calmness as they simply walked away from the negotiations. The doors of the grand hall swung shut behind them, leaving the council members to stare at the empty space they had vacated. A murmur of confusion rippled through the room, and then the whispers began. It was not a single voice but many, the tone filled with unease. Had they been insulted? Were the humans leaving because they had been offended? No one knew. The council had expected many things from humanity: aggressive negotiation tactics, demands, or perhaps even a formal withdrawal. But not this. Not this calm departure. The humans had not raised their voices, had not engaged in any grand speech. They had simply stood, walked, and left. "What is this?" a delegate from the Zirani species asked, their voice shaking slightly. The Zirani were known for their long, intricate debates and strategic maneuvering, and to them, this kind of move was unthinkable. They had never dealt with anyone who behaved like this, who left without explanation, without regard for the proceedings, or for the power the council held. Why didn't they speak? Another delegate, a Farian ambassador, asked nervously. The Farian were a species known for their articulate and persuasive skills in speech. To them, communication was power. The humans had not only refused to speak, they had left without uttering a single word. It was as if their very silence was a statement in itself. The council members who had been engaged in the arguments before the humans' departure were now lost in their own thoughts, struggling to make sense of the situation. Leaders from the older species, who had wielded their influence over the galaxy for centuries, felt a growing sense of discomfort. The humans had been a curiosity at first, their swift rise to power baffling, but not immediately threatening. Yet now, the unexpected display was forcing them to reconsider everything they knew about humanity. The panic started to spread. The chamber was no longer a place of political discourse, but one of uncertainty. Leaders began to speak over one another, their voices rising in volume, demanding answers, desperate for some kind of explanation. But the humans had given none. They had left and left no trail behind, no sign of their intentions, no clear message for anyone to decipher. What does this mean? A delegate from the Eldari species, ancient and wise, spoke slowly, his voice heavy with suspicion. "We've never seen this before. This is not how negotiations are done. This is not how we've ever operated." His voice trembled, as though the very idea of humanity behaving in such a way defied everything he had known for centuries. Others shared his unease. Humanity was a species that had barely arrived on the galactic stage, and yet they had just shown the galaxy's most powerful council that they could walk away without fear. The humans had done something that none of the other species dared to do, and now no one knew how to handle it. The power dynamic had shifted, and the council was scrambling to catch up. The sudden exit of the humans had left a gaping hole in the negotiation room, a hole that no one could easily fill. And as the minutes passed, a quiet realization spread among the delegates. The humans were not like the others. They didn't play by the same rules. And whatever this moment meant, it was clear that the galaxy had underestimated humanity. As the humans exited the chamber, the council hall fell into a profound silence. The debates that had been raging only moments before now seemed distant, their significance fading into the background. The grand hall, once filled with the sound of countless voices, now echoed with only the murmurs of confusion and disbelief. No one knew how to proceed. The humans had left without a single word, leaving the galaxy's most influential species paralyzed by the sheer unexpectedness of it all. The panic spread quickly among the council's leadership. The room buzzed with nervous energy as some delegates scrambled to contact the human representatives, eager to understand what had just transpired. Were the humans offended? Was this some sort of cultural misunderstanding? Or had they simply decided that the council was beneath them? No one could say. The humans had given no explanation, leaving the council with nothing but questions. Why did they leave? A delegate from the Shinari species asked, their voice trembling. This is not how negotiations are done. We have always reached a consensus. Always. The Shinari had long been known for their diplomatic skills, their ability to smooth over even the most difficult of situations. But this was different. This wasn't just a disagreement or a challenge. This was an outright departure, a rejection of the entire process. A representative from the Ilari, a species known for their deep understanding of galactic politics, stood up and addressed the chamber. This is more than just an act of defiance, they said, their voice steady despite the growing tension. The humans are sending a message. We just don't know what that message is yet. The thought struck everyone in the room at once. The humans weren't just playing a game of politics. They were doing something far more significant. They were making a statement about their place in the galaxy, about their role in the Council. The other species had been so caught up in their own power struggles and political maneuvering that they had failed to understand the nature of humanity. The humans weren't interested in mere politics. They were interested in something far bigger. But what? No one could say for certain. The humans had barely been on the galactic stage long enough for anyone to grasp their true nature. They were young, yes, but they were also relentless, resilient. They had survived wars, extinction events, and countless struggles that had wiped out civilizations far older and more powerful. Their history, though brief, was filled with moments of triumph against all odds. And now, they had walked away from the Council without so much as a glance back. Some members of the Council began to grow desperate. They knew that the humans were a rising force in the galaxy, their influence spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. If they refused to return to the negotiations, the delicate balance the Council had worked so hard to maintain could collapse. Trade routes could be severed. Alliances could disintegrate. And worse, a galaxy that had only just begun to heal after centuries of conflict might be plunged back into chaos. "We can't let this stand," a representative from the Trellcarry species said, their voice sharp with urgency. "We have to find a way to bring them back to the table. We cannot afford to lose the humans." The panic intensified. The other species, who had once looked down upon humanity as an upstart, now found themselves at the mercy of the very species they had underestimated. The humans were not the fragile, naive creatures they had believed them to be. They were something else entirely, something far more dangerous. And now, the Council was left scrambling to find a way to win them back, to understand what had just happened and what it meant for the future of the galaxy. The humans had left, and no one knew how to make them return. As the Council members debated in a frenzy, the realization slowly began to settle in. They had underestimated humanity. Their history, though brief in comparison to the ancient species of the galaxy, was filled with remarkable resilience and unyielding determination. The humans had faced extinction, natural disasters, wars, and struggles that had brought other civilizations to their knees. Yet they had risen each time, stronger than before. And now, they had made it clear that they were not here to simply follow the dictates of the galactic elite. The elder species, who had long controlled the narrative of the galaxy, could no longer ignore the implications of the humans' actions. For centuries, they had maintained the balance of power through intricate alliances and trade agreements, ensuring that the galaxy moved according to their wishes. But the humans had just sent a signal, one that could not be ignored. The message was clear. Humanity would not be subjugated. They would not bend their knee to the will of the Council. They would chart their own course, even if it meant walking away from everything they had worked to achieve. In the quiet aftermath of the humans' departure, a voice broke through the tension. It was the voice of a Zirani elder, one of the Council's most respected figures. His species had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires, and his wisdom was often sought by the younger races. He stood at the front of the room, his expression calm, but his eyes filled with a rare intensity. "We have seen civilizations rise and fall," the elder said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of experience. "But never before have we encountered a species like the humans. They do not play by our rules. They do not bow to our power. And perhaps that is something we should learn to respect." His words struck a chord with the Council, especially those who had once believed humanity was simply a small, insignificant player on the galactic stage. The elder's words carried a weight that no one could deny. The humans, with their small yet incredibly resilient civilization, had done something that no other species had dared to do. They had rejected the Council's power without fear. "What are we to do now?" a representative from the Trellcarry species asked, their voice tinged with frustration. "We cannot ignore them. We cannot afford to simply let them walk away. If we do, we risk losing everything." Another voice, this time from a young ambassador of the Farian species, spoke up. Perhaps we've been too focused on maintaining our control. What if? What if we tried to understand them? What if, instead of trying to manipulate their decisions, we allowed them to guide us toward a new path? The room fell into a contemplative silence. The young Farian ambassador's words were met with mixed reactions, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. The council had spent centuries believing that they held all the answers, that they were the ones who shaped the future of the galaxy. But the humans had just proven that the galaxy could change in unexpected ways. And now, as the silence lingered, the question remained: would the council seek to understand humanity, or would they try to force them back into the fold? Outside the council building, the humans had gathered. Their representatives stood in quiet conversation, the weight of their decision hanging over them. They had left the council hall for a reason, not out of anger, but out of something more profound. Humanity was not here to play the game of politics. They were here to forge their own path. And whatever the council decided, humanity would move forward with or without their approval. As the council debated their next move, the humans stood firm in their resolve, knowing that their strength lay not in the power they had over others, but in their ability to walk away when necessary. As the days turned into weeks, the galaxy began to feel the shifting tides of power. The Galactic Council, once a symbol of authority, found itself scrambling to keep up with the rapid rise of humanity. No longer content to sit idly by, the humans had begun to chart their own path. They had established new trade routes, fostered new alliances, and slowly but surely they had begun to accumulate influence across the stars. Their sudden departure from the council had been the spark that set everything into motion. And now, their impact was undeniable. The council's attempts to reassert control were met with resistance. Many species, once loyal to the established order, were beginning to question whether the old ways were the best ways. The humans had shown them a different path, one of self-determination, of independence. It was a path that resonated with many, especially those who had long been sidelined by the more powerful species. The smaller worlds, once ignored or oppressed, were now beginning to align themselves with humanity, seeking out new opportunities for trade and cooperation outside of the council's reach. In the council chambers, the atmosphere had become tense. Delegates who had once been confident in their ability to steer the galaxy were now increasingly uncertain. The discussions had turned from debates about trade and diplomacy to debates about how to deal with the human anomaly. How could they re-engage with a species that had shown so little interest in following the rules of the game? How could they bring them back into the fold without losing face or appearing weak? "We cannot allow this to continue," a representative from the ancient Goran species said, his voice filled with frustration. "The humans have made a mockery of our authority. They must be brought back into line, or the entire council will lose its credibility." But not everyone shared this sentiment. The Zirani elder, whose earlier words had been a call for understanding, now found himself at odds with his fellow delegates. "If we push too hard," he warned, "we risk creating a rift that cannot be mended. The humans are not like us. They do not respond to pressure in the same way. If we try to force them back, we will only drive them further away." Despite the elder's warning, the pressure to act grew. The council was in a state of panic, unsure of how to proceed. Some suggested using force, deploying fleets to intimidate the humans into compliance. Others proposed a diplomatic approach, offering concessions in exchange for their return to the council's fold. But no matter the approach, the uncertainty remained. The humans had shown that they were not easily swayed. They had walked away from the council once, and there was no guarantee that they would return, no matter how hard the council tried to reel them back in. Meanwhile, humanity continued to advance, undeterred by the council's uncertainty. Human ships patrolled the newly established trade routes, their presence now a regular fixture across the galaxy. The people of Earth and its colonies were no longer just observers of galactic politics. They were active participants, forging their own destiny. They had learned quickly that the key to survival in the galaxy was not to be found in old alliances or outdated power structures. It was about strength, independence, and the willingness to stand firm when the stakes were high. Back on Earth, the leaders of the human delegation held a private meeting, far removed from the distractions of the Council's turmoil. Their decision to walk away had been deliberate, calculated. They knew that their future in the galaxy would not be determined by the Council or any other outside force. They would determine it themselves. As they discussed their next moves, one thing became clear. Humanity had taken the first steps toward becoming a new force in the galaxy. Whether the Council liked it or not, the old order was changing, and humanity would not be left behind. The humans had walked away, but they had not retreated. They had set their own course, and the galaxy was watching. The Council's fate was uncertain, but humanity's future was now in their hands. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy was faced with a question it had never considered before. Would it embrace this new power, or would it resist, and risk being left behind in the wake of humanity's rise? Across the galaxy, whispers of humanity's bold move spread quickly. News of their sudden departure from the Galactic Council reached even the farthest corners of space. Some species marveled at the audacity of the humans, wondering how they could walk away from such an opportunity, from the chance to influence the direction of the galaxy. Others were more cautious, fearful of what this meant. Was humanity simply testing the waters, or had they truly decided to reject the established order? On the smaller worlds, where the influence of the Council was less directly felt, there was a sense of admiration. Many species, long oppressed or disregarded by the more powerful members of the Council, saw in humanity's actions a symbol of strength. The humans had not bowed to the pressure of the galactic elite. They had not played by the same rules. To these lesser species, it was a message of hope. If humanity could stand alone and survive, perhaps they could do the same. But among the Council's leaders, a different conversation was taking place. Behind closed doors, fear was beginning to take root. The humans were unpredictable, and that was something the Council had never had to contend with before. For centuries, the most powerful species had ruled through carefully orchestrated negotiations, power plays, and alliances. But now, the humans had shown that they were not interested in playing that game. Their very presence in the Council was a disruption, and their sudden exit had thrown everything into disarray. "The humans don't fear us," one delegate said quietly in a private meeting, "and that's what makes them dangerous. They don't need our approval, our resources, or our alliances. They are perfectly capable of charting their own course." Another delegate, a member of the Zirani species, nodded gravely. "They have the potential to disrupt everything we've built. The galaxy could be changing, and we may not be ready for it." The discussions were growing more frantic as the days passed. The Council members who had once been certain of their dominance began to question their position. The humans had not just walked away from the table, they had redefined the very terms of engagement. For a species that had been considered insignificant just a short time ago, humanity's sudden refusal to conform had changed the entire balance of power. Meanwhile, the humans remained silent, making no effort to explain themselves or re-engage with the Council. Their leaders back at the embassy were calm but resolute. There was no hurry to return to the negotiations. They had already made their stance clear. Humanity would not be pushed around. They would not be swayed by the political games of ancient species, no matter how powerful. The future of the galaxy would be decided on their terms, not by the Council's outdated protocols. As the Council continued to wrangle with itself, the influence of humanity began to spread. Trade routes that had once been controlled by the Council's largest members were now being rerouted by human ships. The economic power of humanity, once underestimated, was beginning to shift the balance of resources. Smaller factions, sensing the winds of change, began aligning themselves with humanity, offering trade deals and alliances that bypassed the Council's traditional channels. The Council, now fully aware of the depth of humanity's independence, faced an uncomfortable reality. They could either try to force humanity back into the fold, a move that could risk further alienating them, or they could seek to understand them, acknowledge that the galaxy was no longer theirs to control alone. But time was running out, and the longer they delayed, the more power humanity would gain. The decision was no longer just about politics, it was about survival. Would the Council adapt, or would it remain stuck in the old ways, blind to the new force rising on the horizon? The answer was still unclear, but one thing was certain. Humanity was no longer a player to be ignored. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy would have to find a way to deal with them, whether it was ready or not. As weeks turned into months, the tension in the galaxy continued to grow. The Galactic Council, still reeling from humanity's sudden exit, found itself in a precarious position. The balance of power had shifted in ways that were both subtle and profound. The smaller species, those that had once been silenced or ignored, were beginning to realize that they no longer needed the Council's approval to thrive. Humanity, despite its decision to walk away, had inadvertently become a symbol of independence for many. In fact, humanity's refusal to participate in the Council's games had sparked a kind of rebellion, one that was quietly spreading across the galaxy. The Council, in its desperation, tried everything it could think of to reassert control. Diplomatic missions were sent to Earth, but the humans were careful in their responses. They refused to engage in direct talks with the Council, choosing instead to expand their influence on their own terms. Trade agreements were struck, alliances were made, and entire systems that had once been under the Council's sway now found themselves working with humanity instead. The flow of resources was shifting, and with it, the economic power of the Council was beginning to wane. Inside the Council chambers, frustration boiled over. Delegates from the older species, those who had dominated galactic politics for centuries, were growing impatient. They could no longer deny the fact that humanity's rise was disrupting everything they had carefully constructed. The Zereni elder, once the voice of reason, now found himself at odds with his fellow delegates. "We must adapt," he insisted, his voice quieter than usual, "or we risk falling into irrelevance. Humanity's influence is growing. If we do not find a way to engage with them, we will lose our place in this galaxy." But not all Council members were ready to accept that reality. Some, particularly the more conservative factions, continued to cling to the old ways. They believed that humanity's refusal to comply with the Council's rules was a challenge that had to be met with force. "If we let them get away with this," a delegate from the Trelkeri species said harshly, "we risk more than just losing our authority. We risk our very survival. We cannot allow a single species to dictate the terms of galactic affairs." The debate in the Council grew heated, with arguments flying back and forth. Some members wanted to impose economic sanctions on humanity, others suggested military action, and a few even advocated for assassination attempts against the human leaders. The once united Council was now fractured, its unity crumbling under the pressure of their inability to handle the rising force that was humanity. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the human delegation was calm, almost serene. They had seen the reactions of the Council, heard the murmurs of dissent, but none of it fazed them. They had anticipated that the Council would not accept their newfound independence easily. They had anticipated that the older species, so set in their ways, would try to push back against the changing tide. But humanity had learned from history. They had learned that the key to survival in the galaxy was not simply power. It was the ability to make their own choices, to act without fear of reprisal. And so, while the Council continued to falter, humanity expanded its influence further. The human fleet patrolled the borders of their new territories, while diplomats worked behind the scenes, securing new partnerships and extending their reach into parts of the galaxy that had been closed off to them only a few months prior. Humanity's message was clear. They did not need the Council. They did not need anyone to tell them how to live, how to trade, or how to govern. They would carve their own path. The Council, meanwhile, faced a harsh truth. It had failed to adapt. The world it had built was crumbling, and the galaxy was moving on without it. The days of control were slipping away. The human presence in the galaxy had disrupted everything. And no matter how much the Council tried to force its hand, it could not stop what was already in motion. The galaxy had changed, and humanity had helped lead the charge. The final question remained, unspoken but lingering in the air. Would the Council find a way to adjust to this new reality, or would it be left behind, a relic of a past that no longer had a place in the galaxy's future? The answers were still unclear, but one thing was certain: humanity would continue to move forward, no matter the cost. The galaxy had underestimated them, and now it was too late to turn back. As the months passed, the Council's response grew increasingly erratic. The pressure to reassert their control over humanity only fueled more divisions among the elder species. Some argued that the old ways of dominance and political manipulation were no longer viable in the face of humanity's growing independence. Others, however, clung to the belief that the galaxy could not function without their leadership, that the Council's authority was sacrosanct, and that humanity's actions needed to be rectified. The humans, meanwhile, remained steadfast in their decision to chart their own course. They did not engage in the Council's heated debates, nor did they bow to the pressures from the galaxy's older races. In fact, their silence in the face of the Council's increasingly desperate attempts to draw them back into negotiations spoke volumes. Humanity was no longer interested in being part of a system that sought to control them. They had set their own trajectory, and the galaxy would have to follow their lead, or be left behind. Throughout the galaxy, the influence of humanity continued to expand. The trade routes, once controlled by the Council, now featured human ships prominently. Their growing economic power was undeniable. Colonies established by humanity on distant worlds flourished, often outside the reach of the Council's traditional influence. With every new trade agreement and diplomatic mission, humanity solidified its place as a rising power, one that could no longer be ignored. The smaller species, once overlooked or sidelined by the Council, now saw humanity as an ally, a partner in forging a new path. They saw the humans as a beacon of hope, proof that it was possible to break free from the political games of the Council's old guard. And slowly the tide began to turn. More and more systems aligned themselves with humanity, recognizing that the old order was crumbling and that a new era was dawning. Back in the Council chambers, the realization began to settle in. The Council had failed. The old system of alliances, treaties, and power plays could not stand in the face of humanity's refusal to follow the script. For the first time in centuries, the Council found itself outmatched, outpaced, and outmaneuvered. The humans had shown them that power was not simply a matter of military strength or political maneuvering. It was about the ability to act independently, to create opportunities outside the established structures, and to build something new. In the final, fateful meeting of the Council, a decision was made. There would be no more attempts to bring humanity back into the fold, no more desperate measures to force them into compliance. The elder species, realizing that their influence had waned beyond repair, begrudgingly accepted the reality. Humanity had changed the galaxy in ways they could not control. It was no longer a question of whether humanity would join the Council. It was a question of how the Council would adapt to humanity's rise. The last remaining factions of the Council debated their future, but deep down, they knew that the era of their dominance was over. Humanity had proven that it could thrive without the Council's approval. The galaxy was no longer just a collection of powerful species vying for control. It was a place where new voices could rise, where new ideas could flourish. And in the wake of humanity's bold rejection of the old order, a new balance of power had begun to take shape. As the Council disbanded, and the galaxy moved into uncharted territory, one thing remained clear. Humanity had not only walked away from negotiations, they had walked away from a future controlled by others. And in doing so, they had forged a new path that no one, not even the Council, could ever hope to control. The galaxy had been changed forever, and humanity would lead the way into the unknown. The Council had been right about one thing: humanity was dangerous. But it was a danger the galaxy would soon come to rely on.